Right, let's bring in some reaction as we reflect on the carnage we're seeing on our roads, the need to educate South Africans about road safety. We're joined now by Lee Randall, who's co-founder of Road Ethics Project. A very good evening to you, Lee. Thank you so much for your time. More and more deadly crashes on the road. If we have to try and make sense of it all, assessing some of the biggest contributing factors, what would you say stands out?
Well, Paul, I just want to mention, first of all, that today is International Youth Day, and road safety is a massive youth issue. It affects people across the lifespan, but in particular affects the youth in the SADC member states, and it's something we definitely need to pay more attention to. The risks are multiple. The risks are to do with the way the roads are designed, the way vehicles are manufactured and maintained, or maybe not maintained, and also road user behavior, and that includes all categories of road users. The responsibility for addressing crashes has often been called a distributed responsibility. The moral responsibility is greatest for those with the greatest power over the system, and that would really be government as the lawmaker, the law enforcer, the road designer, and also the regulator of how people and vehicles move on the roads and in the road traffic system. So we can address particular categories of road users, such as drivers, and for instance, appeal to them to drive slower, be more vigilant, be less distracted, don't drive drunk. That is one part of the equation. But the other part of the equation is that we've got to look at how the system is designed, how people are entering the system. So what is our licensing regime like? Do people who need professional driver's permits actually have those, and are those meaningful? Or are they just a piece of paper or a cursory process? And what's very clear from the crashes that have been reported recently, particularly involving learners, is that all levels of vehicles are involved, and learners are also vulnerable walking on the side of the road. There was a nasty crash recently where a vehicle hit learners as they were walking to or from school. So it's minibuses, it's midibuses, it's maxi buses, and the crash partners, we can see very clearly from just the last few weeks of crashes, could be anything from a train to an articulated truck to a small vehicle, a bakkie that hits a minibus from behind.
And Lee, perhaps let me allow me to interrupt you there. As you talk about the second part of the equation, how are people entering the system? It's a very important question, as we, of course, have learned over the past years that some drivers obtain licenses through corrupt means. Every now and then you'll hear of a person who is issued a driver's license without even being tested, that in itself posing a massive, massive danger on the roads. And you also spoke about the first part of the equation, really just honing in on human behavior and what kind of initiatives are now needed to make sure that those who enter their cars must now abide by the rules of the road and have an understanding of how the rules work.
Well, the Road Ethics Project, by its name, you can understand that our focus is on ethical literacy. So it's about looking at the rights and wrongs of road use in a broad sense. And there's a philosopher in a European country who talks about us needing to be highly constructed human beings from an ethical perspective or a moral perspective, in terms of entering the road traffic system, because it is the most dangerous space any of us spend time in most days of our lives. And that means that if you are going to be driving a heavy vehicle, or you're going to be conveying precious human cargo or hazardous goods, that your level of moral responsibility is higher because you can inflict more damage on yourself and others. And you therefore need a higher level of ethical preparedness. So it's not just about getting a license. And yes, there are distinct problems with our licensing system. The regime itself, the K53, has been critiqued as not safety oriented enough. It's very technical. People learn to do things in a certain sequence, but not necessarily understand why they are being asked to do those things and what the safety link is. The other issue is we can't possibly have law enforcement. We can't have a traffic cop policing every kilometer of every road, every hour of every day. So the inner traffic cop does need to be awakened. And that is achieved through a variety of mechanisms. One is education, awareness raising, appealing to people's better nature. But another very important one that is often not fully understood by the public is the role of the road design itself. So we have a great number of regional roads which are undivided, and we see some very horrible head-on crashes on those roads. And those roads don't match up to global best practice. They are considered particularly unsafe for certain categories of road users. Pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists are vulnerable road users, and a lot of our road infrastructure doesn't properly cater for their needs. So while vehicle occupants may be relatively safer, not necessarily is that true for those traveling in public transport, scholar transport, because of the fact that the safety features available to them, and this is particularly true for children, may not be optimal and reach global best practice.
So what conversation needs to take place on that level now? What are the factors that the Transport Department need to consider as you talk about those glaring problems? I mean, you talk about children. Just last week, there was a devastating bus train crash in Mpumalanga. I mean, you touched very briefly on it. That in itself, also talking to the big questions that may be asked. Was there no visibility that a train will be crossing? Was it it's been suggested at this stage that the driver was allegedly drunk, but in terms of visibility of the signage, was it there? Was it not there? What needs to happen going forward?
Those are excellent questions, and very often infrastructure guides people's behavior, and what we need is road infrastructure that makes the safe choice the logical choice, the easy choice, the choice that a driver, for instance, will follow without thinking twice. And if we think about the tanker explosion under a bridge in Boksburg, the safety failures began long before that crash took place. The signage of a low bridge was inadequate. The fencing alongside the railway line that crossed over the road at that point was broken down, not maintained. The driver of the tanker had gone off route. The tanker driver also tried to get the public not to come close to the scene because he recognized the danger. And yet people came, and people even brought their children to see the spectacle. So there are multiple ways in which the crash. And I just want to mention, language is really important. Calling these events accidents is not really accurate. There are crashes. And crash prevention begins long before the road user starts moving on the road, whatever kind of road user that is. And it comes down a lot to how we design roads, how we plan land use, and how people are having to be mobile in order to get to the destinations they need. School kids traveling long distances in unsafe vehicles or on foot in areas where there are no pedestrian safety features is a huge part of our problem in South Africa.
Lee, very quickly before we let you go, I mean, you talk about school children accessing transport. What sort of safety checks can a parent who's standing on the side of the road before letting their child enter this vehicle, what kind of ammunition do they have in terms of assessing whether or not this is the kind of vehicle my child should be in?
It's difficult because
Yeah.
sometimes scholar transport operators have more than one vehicle and one will be pressed into action. So what a parent can do is try to check that that scholar transport operator is duly registered. In some provinces, that might be with the Department of Basic Education. In other provinces, it might fall under Department of Transport. And unfortunately, the government departments don't necessarily speak to each other. Parents and school governing bodies should also work together in terms of trying to police and investigate and scrutinize the quality of both the drivers and the vehicles. Very often the owners are in the shadows, they're in the backgrounds, and it's important to know who is the ultimate owner of the vehicle and what checks and balances do they put in place in terms of their drivers, the driver quality, the driver licensing, and then also a visual check of the vehicle. I know some parents are not in a position to even lay eyes on the vehicles in which their children travel, and they discover belatedly that they were on the back of a bakkie, for instance. It's a very difficult thing, and I think parent communities, school communities, and all the government departments concerned do need to come together and put eyes on this really important industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Some sound advice indeed. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Lee Randall, who is the founder of Road Ethics Project. Of course, we do continue to bring you more news.